House gavels in. An hour of general debate on that and a motion to recommit. Also 2 suspension bills on the agenda, including one dealing with small business programs. And later tonight, the State of the Union at 9.
The House will be in order. The prayer will be offered by our chaplain, Father Coughlin.
Open the door, heighten the security, gather the people, proclaim a fast. Through the medium of television, enter in and ready yourself to listen, America. Lord God, today this House chamber and its members prepare this place and this nation to welcome President Barack Obama tonight, to listen to his State of the Union. Guide and protect him, Lord. Grant him health, wisdom, prudence, and forbearance. Help all Americans, Lord, for we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty. Do assemble and ready ourselves to hear the President's message and act according to the Constitution that holds us together as a new order, both now and for ages to come. Amen.
The Chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by our colleague from Texas, Mr. Poe.
Join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
Mr. Speaker, by direction of the Democratic caucus, I offer a privileged resolution and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Resolution 52, resolved that the following named members be and are hereby elected to the following standing
Mr. Speaker,
committees.
I ask unanimous consent that the resolution be considered as read and printed in the record.
Without objection. Without objection, the resolution is agreed to and the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The Chair will entertain 15 one-minute requests on each side. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Request permission to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, the government is going broke. Government spends too much, it borrows too much, it taxes too much. One idea is to raise the government credit card limit. It's like when my 4 kids went off to college. When they reached the maximum on their credit cards, the credit card company would simply raise their limit. Thus, they could spend more money by borrowing money. However, they all found out how difficult it was to get out of debt until they quit spending money. Instead of more U.S. debt, why not cut spending? Start with foreign aid. There are 194 countries in the world, and the United States gives to over 150 of them. Did you know we give money to the dictator Chavez of Venezuela, the tyrant of South America? Did you know we give money to Russia? And the zinger of all, did you know we give money to China? Yes, the country that owns most of our debt gets foreign aid. This absurdity must cease. No more foreign aid to the likes of Venezuela, Russia, or China. And that's just the way it is.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise? Without objection.
Tonight, State of the Nation address is vitally important that President Obama lay out an effective strategy for new job creation. The economy is improving, with more than 1 million private sector jobs created in last year, and more people are going back to work. But far too many Americans still find themselves without a job, especially in my district in the Inland Empire, where the unemployment is 14%. At this time, enormous challenges, we must all recognize that the problems we face cannot be solved by Democrats and Republicans' solutions alone. Only, I state, only by working together, finding a common ground, will we overcome the obstacles in front of us. I stand ready to work with all of my colleagues, Republican, Tea Parties included, to think outside the box and create a better future for our children and our country. As we prepare for the President's address tonight, I ask my friends on the other side of the aisle, are you ready to work with us to move forward? I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana rise? Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tonight, the President of the United States will appear in this chamber, as nearly every president has for more than 150 years, and report on the State of the Union, and we will receive him with the respect that is due his office. We are told in press reports that the President will focus on the future, on winning the future. But as the President said last Friday, and I quote, "The past 2 years were about pulling our economy back from the brink," close quote. And we expect to hear the same theme today. But frankly, as most Americans know, during the last 2 years, this administration and the former majority in Congress met our present crisis with an avalanche of borrowing and spending and bailouts and taxes and takeovers and mandates. Far from pulling our economy back, the weight of debt and taxes and regulation have stifled our economic recovery. Mr. President, we will not win the future with the failed economic policies of the past. As you come into this hallowed chamber tonight, we urge you, Mr. President, not just a new speech. Give the American people a new direction.
Members are advised to direct their comments to the chair. For what purpose does the gentleman from Rhode Island rise? Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today with serious concerns about the misguided agenda our friends on the other side of the aisle are pursuing. While Democrats continue to make job creation, economic recovery, and debt reduction top priorities, the majority continues to engage in political theater. In fact, their first actions after assuming control of the House haven't created a single job or protected a single American business. Instead, the other side's top priority has been to repeal the patient protections provided by the new health care reform bill. And their so-called budget resolution that they offer today is a one-page document with no specific cuts to reduce spending, no budget numbers, and most importantly, no ideas on job creation or on economic recovery. Mr. Speaker, we were sent here to create jobs and get the American economy back on track, both Republicans and Democrats. Let's stop the political gimmickry and let's get to the work of putting the American people back to work. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise? Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, as we look forward to tonight's State of the Union address, it's important for all of us to keep in mind the most important issues to the American people: jobs, the economy, and deficit reduction. In the weeks and months ahead, we look forward to working together, Democrats and Republicans, to focus our legislative attention on these issues. But as we debate these issues, it's easy to simply identify the problem. We all know that unemployment is too high, the recovery is not as fast as we would like, and the deficit is out of control. But the time for simply defining the problem has long since passed, and realistic solutions are long overdue. As we near completion of our first month of the new Congress, the American people are still waiting to hear the majority's specific recommendations on how to address these issues. Tonight, we will hear from the President. I look forward to soon hearing from the majority some specific details about their deficit reduction plans, not just ambiguous goals.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Florida rise?
Good morning, Madam Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to honor the sacrifice of 2 St. Petersburg, Florida police officers who were killed in the line of duty yesterday. Sergeant Tom Batinger and Officer Jeffrey Yazlowitz were following up on a fugitive task force warrant when they and a deputy U.S. Marshal were ambushed and shot. Officer Yaslowitz was fatally shot while trying to arrest the dangerous fugitive. Officer Baitinger was shot while attempting to rescue his colleagues. Officer Yaslowitz was 39 years old. He was a K-9 officer and has worked with his K-9 partner Ace for the last 2 years. He is survived by his wife Lorraine and 3 young children. Sergeant Thomas J. Baitinger was 48 years old. He is survived by his wife Paige. As my colleague Congressman Bill Young stated yesterday from this floor, we pray for their families, the St. Petersburg Police Department, Mayor Bill Foster, Police Chief Chuck Harmon, and we honor the sacrifice of our community heroes and all who wear the uniform of service.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington rise? Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I want to give folks a preview of tonight's off-Broadway performance that will follow the President's State of the Union address. The stage will be the House Budget Committee. The actor in a one-man show will be Paul Ryan of Wisconsin. And the script will begin with something like, "Hello, I'm Representative Paul Ryan, and I'm speaking to you from the very location where the Democratic job-killing spending binge unfolded during the last 2 years." Unfortunately, the script for tonight's performance will not include the fact that Democratic investments have created more jobs during the last 2 years than were created during the entire 8 years of George Bush. You also won't hear about the one thing that Republicans fought tooth and nail for during the last 2 years, an extension of a budget-busting $700 billion tax break for wealthy Americans. Coming attractions? The Chairman will have another show in the next week where he pulls a budget number from a hat filled with rabbits. That will be our budget number. Enjoy the show. I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise? Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I rise to discuss the importance of reducing the influence of corporate special interest money in our elections. As a result of the Citizens United decision, corporations and other special interests are free to pump unlimited sums of money into campaign attacks. And worse yet, because of this decision, there's no good mechanism to keep money from foreign sources out of our elections. We need reform that brings transparency to the campaign finance system and protects the best interests of middle-class families. I will call on the new majority to work in a bipartisan fashion to bring transparency to the campaign finance system. I supported the Disclose Act last year, and I believe this bill is a good first step. I will continue standing up for middle-class families, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise? Without objection.
Madam Speaker, tonight we will hear about the State of the Union. And I hope we hear the sometimes painful truth about the State of the Union. More jobs lost in the last couple of years, and we need to do something about that. But the answer is not more spending that leads us to a greater deficit, more borrowing from China. The answer is not to continue on to have higher gas prices because we are buying our oil from OPEC, which they use to build their lavish palaces and drive their Rolls Royces, while our communities are trying to find ways to afford the patching compound to patch up our potholes. What we need to be doing is taking action that uses our resources to create American jobs. A bill that I'm going to be reintroducing from last year is one that says, let's stop this moratorium that prevents us from using our oil to drill our resources. We can actually create jobs and have about $3+ trillion in federal revenue without raising taxes, without raising our trade deficit, and without sending more money to OPEC. I hope that this is something this Congress considers and this President has an open mind to dealing with so we can create jobs without creating more deficit. I yield back.
What purpose does the gentleman from Connecticut rise? Without objection.
Madam Speaker, tonight the President of the United States will stand in this chamber and discharge his constitutional obligation to address the State of the Union for the Congress. I understand that many of my colleagues will be sitting together in a bipartisan way. I think that's a good thing. What I really hope, though, is that we get commonsensical about where we are tomorrow. that as we talk about the economy, that we agree that we should cut regulations which serve no purpose but to stifle industry, but that we should not attack the rules which keep our air clean and our water drinkable. We can and we must reduce the deficit and get our fiscal house in order. But do not try to persuade the American public that we can fail to invest in schools, in railways, in highways, in networks that will provide economic prosperity for decades to come. I'm glad my colleagues are going to be sitting together in this chamber tonight. What I really hope is that tomorrow we're standing together behind commonsensical changes that will make this economy strong. Madam Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Missouri rise? Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I, like all 434 other members of this body, was elected to the 112th Congress. And shortly after arriving, I was told that the #1 responsibility that we had was to create jobs. So far, that has not been the case. We have given attention to health care, which I understood to have been one issue that we gave too much attention to. And so my question today is, what about the jobs? When are we going to talk about jobs? I would like for somebody, anybody, to talk about jobs. When are we going to do the job of creating jobs? If we do our jobs, then we might be able to create some jobs. If we don't, nothing will happen. Madam Speaker, I'm urging the members of this body, particularly those who are now in charge, to begin to deal with jobs. I yield back the balance of my time.
The chair lays before the House a communication.
The Honorable the Speaker, House of Representatives. Sir, pursuant to the permission granted in Clause 2H of Rule 2 of the Rules of the U.S. House of Representatives, the clerk received the following message from the Secretary of the Senate on January 25, 2011 at 11 a.m. that the Senate agreed to, without amendment, House Concurrent Resolution 10. With best wishes, I am, signed sincerely, Karen L. Haas, Clerk of the House.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the Chair will postpone further proceedings today on motions to suspend the rules on which a recorded vote or the yeas and nays are ordered, or on which the vote incurs objection under Clause 6 of Rule 20. Record votes on postponed questions will be taken later today. For what purpose does the gentleman from Iowa seek recognition?
I move to suspend the rules and adopt House Resolution H-Res 49.
The clerk will report the title of the resolution.
House Resolution 49, resolution providing capital-flown flags for recipients of the Medal of Honor.
Roll the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Latham, and the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Beatty, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Iowa.
Madam Speaker, I ask that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H-Res 49, providing capital-flown flags for recipients of the Medal of Honor. Mr. Speaker, the resolution is simple, its language is succinct, but it is so much more significant than mere symbolism. This resolution provides a family member or the Medal of Honor recipient themselves a U.S. flag flown over this Capitol, along with the certificate which reads, quote, "This flag has been flown over the United States Capitol in honor of the service and sacrifice of recipients of the Medal of Honor, the highest honor awarded to members of the armed forces for valor in combat, with profound gratitude on behalf of the United States House of Representatives." Madam Speaker, the Medal of Honor is the highest honor awarded to members of the armed forces. And to these Medal of Honor recipients, we as a country, as one nation, and as this collective House, are immeasurably thankful for their service, their sacrifice, and their bravery, which sometimes has meant giving that last full measure of devotion. I'm especially proud of Staff Sergeant Salvatore Ginta, a native of Clinton, Iowa, who is the first living recipient of the Medal of Honor since the Vietnam War, and is here in the Capitol for the State of the Union address this evening and a recognition ceremony tomorrow. Sergeant Ginta's service embodies a spirit of selflessness, humility, and determination that Iowans are known for both in the military and civilian life. We pass this resolution as a heartfelt and profoundly sincere thank you for those receiving the highest of honors, the Medal of Honor. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, this resolution should garner overwhelming bipartisan support, and I urge all my colleagues to support H.Res. 49, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Without objection.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, this resolution recognizes the courage and sacrifices of Staff Sergeant Salvatore A. Ginta and other Medal of Honor recipients in defending their country in the line of duty. The Medal of Honor is the highest award of bravery that can be given to a member of the United States Armed Forces. This resolution would acknowledge members of our armed forces that received the Medal of Honor by providing them with a flag flown over the Capitol, along with a certificate signed by the Speaker of the House. The flag will be provided at no cost to the recipient or family of the recipient. May this small gesture serve as a constant reminder of our Medal of Honor recipients who act selflessly and heroically in defense of the freedom that we, the American people, enjoy. I am pleased to support this resolution and urge all my colleagues to vote aye, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Iowa.
If the gentleman has another speaker, I'll reserve at this time, please.
Gentleman continues to reserve.
Thank you,
Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Yes, Madam Speaker. Right now I'd like to yield as much time as you may consume. The gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Losak.
Gentleman's recognized. Gentleman from Iowa.
Thank you, gentleman from Pennsylvania, for yielding. And Madam Speaker, I am particularly honored today to join my friend and colleague, Congressman Latham, in offering this resolution today. Tomorrow, the Iowa delegation will join the Chief of Staff of the Army, General George Casey, and Senator Inouye to honor and recognize Staff Sergeant Salvatore Ginta, the first living Medal of Honor recipient since the Vietnam War. Staff Sergeant Ginta is from Hiawatha, Iowa at the moment, although he was born and raised in Clinton. Hiawatha is a town I am proud to represent in the 2nd District. I first had the honor of meeting Sergeant Ginta, or Sal, while visiting our troops stationed overseas during the 2009 Thanksgiving holiday, and I was able to have Thanksgiving dinner with him at Vicenza. What immediately struck me about Sergeant Ginta was his humility. He made sergeant in just 4 years. He was a veteran of 2 tours in Afghanistan by the time he was 22 years old. And while surrounded by Taliban fighters in the Korangal Valley in 2007, and having been hit twice himself, he ran directly into gunfire in order to save his wounded comrades and prevent a U.S. soldier from being captured. Yet, since being awarded the Medal of Honor, Sergeant Ginta has insisted that what he did to save his fellow paratroopers was nothing any other soldier wouldn't have done. He has insisted time and again, whether at the White House, the Pentagon, or at the State House in Des Moines, that he holds the Medal of Honor on behalf of his fellow service members. After being inducted into the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes, Sergeant Ginta refused to let the spotlight rest on him alone. Instead, he saluted those who had come before him and those who have made the ultimate sacrifice in defense of our freedom. He said, and I quote, "To all the ones that can't be here, not just 1 or 2, but all of them, not just from the 173rd, not just from Battle Company, but from all services, from the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, the Marines, the Coast Guard, the National Guard, the Reserves, everyone who has ever given so much more than I ever know, I want to say thank you right now to those men and those women, because without them I'm nothing. I haven't given anything compared to those who have given everything." And so I think it is especially appropriate that we have come together today to pay tribute not just to Sergeant Ginta and not just to his fellow Medal of Honor recipients of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, but to each of the 3,448 men and one woman who have received the highest military honor since President Lincoln signed into law legislation offered by a fellow Iowan to create the medal in 1861. The Medal of Honor is reserved for those who are distinguished, quote, conspicuously by gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, unquote. It seems only appropriate that we, the People's House, honor their bravery, their service, and their sacrifice today by directing that the United States flag be flown over the Capitol in their honor. For nearly a decade, the men and women of our all-volunteer force, as well as their families, have answered the call to duty and have served our nation on two fronts, often making great sacrifices and carrying out acts of unimaginable bravery that those of us here at home never read about on the front page. So even as we come together today to honor the bravest of the brave, let us also honor every man and every woman who wears our nation's uniform and who have deployed time and again in many instances to defend our nation, missing moments large and small with their families in order to ensure that our freedom endures. While he may not think of himself as such, to me, Sergeant Junta is a true American hero. He is who I want my grandkids to grow up looking up to. And that is a sentiment shared by thousands of Iowans who are tremendously proud of the soldier we've come to think of as our hometown hero. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation as a small token of our appreciation for the incredible bravery demonstrated by Medal of Honor recipients of today and those of past times and past conflicts. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Iowa.
I thank the Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague, Mr. Loebsack from Iowa, for joining me in this resolution and his lead co-sponsorship on this. The Medal of Honor, like the gentleman just referred to, has quite a history with Iowa in that back in December 9th, 1861, Iowa Senator James W. Grimes first introduced the concept of a Medal of Honor promote the efficiency of the Navy at that time. And later on there was another bill to also recognize people in the Army for their outstanding service and heroic actions. I was very pleased back in 2002 to introduce a bill. I don't know how many people were aware at the time, but there was never a Medal of Honor flag. We had in Jefferson, Iowa, a memorial for Captain Darrell Lindsay, who was a Medal of Honor winner from the World War II, and a man named Bill Kendall, an Army veteran from Jefferson, felt that it was inappropriate that we didn't have a flag there, and so I introduced legislation. Bill Kendall from Jefferson, Iowa, actually designed what is the Medal of Honor flag today, and I'm still so appreciative of what he did. And now at the ceremony down at the White House, when the Medal of Honor was given to this next great Iowan, to see that flag there, it made me feel very, very proud of the contributions that so many people, Iowans, people all across this country, have made and sacrificed for our country and the kind of honor that they deserve. And so I'm just very proud of the history we have, and I think this is a very appropriate way of recognizing those contributions. So with that, I'll reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Madam Speaker, at this time I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Boswell.
Gentleman from Iowa is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend. I rise today as a co-sponsor of House Resolution 49, the Staff Sergeant Salvatore Junta Medal of Honor Flag Resolution. As the first living Medal of Honor winner since the Vietnam War, Staff Sergeant Junta richly deserves to be honored by this House. The resolution is simple. It provides every Medal of Honor winner or their family with a flag flown over the Capitol in tribute to their service. In addition to this resolution, tomorrow we all have the opportunity to join the Chief of Staff of the Army
and distinguished guests at a ceremony and reception in the Congressional Auditorium to honor this soldier of whom all Iowans and Americans are incredibly proud. I'm not surprised, in spite of this praise, that Sergeant Genta has humbly refused to be seen as exceptional. He has at every moment sought to deflect recognition onto his fellow soldiers, men and women in uniform, who serve as bravely every day to support and defend our country and the Constitution. I know all too well that Sergeant Genta is right, and every day our men and women in uniform and their families offer courageous service that deserves to be recognized. My hope is that as we honor Sergeant Genta for gallantry above and beyond the call of duty, we may by extension offer to every member of our armed forces and their families our profound gratitude on behalf of the country, his country, our country, and the United States House of Representatives. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Iowa.
I'll reserve at this time.
Gentleman continues to reserve. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Madam Speaker, I urge an A vote, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from Iowa.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We do have one more speaker who is on his way over, but I would just like to say what an honor it is to be a part of for me to be a part of the ceremony tomorrow to honor Staff Sergeant Genta, and really he is a model for what people in the military today, the service that they give, the humility that he possesses, and you know, the statements that Mr. Loebsack made about the fact that in his acceptance he talked about this was not an award, a medal of honor for him, but for all of his comrades in arms, and that how it was should be given to everyone who acted so bravely that day. But that certainly is part of what Staff Sergeant Genta is all about, and the fact that he is such a humble person, someone who believes in the mission, someone who willingly was there to sacrifice himself to save one of his comrades, I think is so appropriate that we have this recognition today, and that we honor all the people in the service today. So I do not see my colleague here on the floor, so I don't know if I would yield to someone else if you had any other statements, but with that, Madam Speaker, I will yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and agree to House Resolution 49? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative.
Madam Speaker, I would request the yeas and nays, please.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Madam Speaker, by direction of the Republican Conference, I offer a privileged resolution and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Resolution 53, resolved that the following named members
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the resolution be considered as read and printed in the record.
Without objection, the resolution is agreed to and the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Missouri seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 366 to provide for an additional temporary extension of programs under the Small Business Act and the Small Business Act of 1958 and for other purposes.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 366, a bill to provide for an additional temporary extension of programs under the Small Business Act and the Small Business Investment Act of 1958 and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Graves, and the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Velasquez, each control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Missouri.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous
objection.
material on the bill under consideration.
Without objection. Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume. Madam Speaker, we have a big job ahead of us in the 112th Congress. Unemployment remains above 9% and millions of people are out of work. Entrepreneurs are struggling to create jobs and grow their businesses, and threats of higher taxes and more unmanageable federal mandates. Our economic recovery has been erratic at best. Hard work lies ahead to reduce the uncertainty, to create new jobs, and restore confidence in our economy. Today we're discussing a simple extension of programs overseen by the Small Business Administration through May 31st, 2011. Enacting this legislation is a critical first step towards giving small business owners some certainty while we continue to fully examine all of SBA's programs and make necessary changes to improve SBA's services. Enacting this legislation will give our new majority the opportunity to explore new and innovative ideas to improve the services offered by the SBA. I'm humbled and honored to serve our country's entrepreneurs as the chairman of the Small Business Committee, and I look forward to working with Ranking Member Velazquez to enact a more permanent reauthorization in a timely manner. The two of us have had an excellent working relationship over the past 2 years, and I have no doubt that this is going to continue in the future. Madam Speaker, we are all eager to get the work done on restoring America's faith in government and reducing the uncertainty that prevails throughout our economic sectors. We can take this first step towards approving this temporary extension and laying the groundwork for a full reauthorization that will bring these programs into the 21st century. I'd urge my colleagues to vote yes on this bill before us, and I'd reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentlewoman from New York.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Without objection. Gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, the role of small businesses is critical to creating new jobs. With the economy continuing to face challenges on several fronts, we need small firms more than ever. Time and again, they have generated the ideas and know-how that spark job growth. However, entrepreneurs face challenging economic headwinds. Small businesses continue facing obstacles accessing capital, and sales remains flat. Given these realities, we need to make sure that small firms have the resources and tools to start up or expand. The legislation we are considering today does this and extends the authorization of the several important Small Business Administration programs. Through these initiatives, firms can secure financing, receive training, or compete more effectively for federal contracts. While we must keep these programs operational, it is unfortunate that we are doing so through another temporary extension. Last Congress, the House passed 14 bills updating all of SBA's financing and entrepreneurial development programs. However, while the Senate was able to report a few measures out of committee, they were unable to actually pass any legislation affecting these programs through the chamber. As a result, we are here today to temporarily extend the SBA's initiatives. Small businesses across the nation depend on a strong SBA. This is especially true now when many unemployed individuals are turning to entrepreneurship as a source of income. By ensuring that the agency programs do not lapse, we are providing small businesses with the foundation for future growth, and in doing so, helping move the economy forward. Madam Speaker, I urge a yes vote, and if the gentleman doesn't have any other speaker, I'm prepared to yield back my time.
Gentlewoman yields back her time. Gentleman from Missouri.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in order to close this debate, let me reiterate that small businesses are going to lead this economic recovery. But we have to provide them with some certainty first. And enacting this legislation before us is going to do just that, and let entrepreneurs know that we're back on their side. Once again, I urge my colleagues to support this legislation. I look forward to working with Ranking Member Velazquez and our colleagues on the Small Business Committee for a more permanent extension, and I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 366? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed. And without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, pursuant to House Resolution 43, I call up House Resolution 38 and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the title of the resolution.
House Calendar Number 3, House Resolution 38, Resolution to reduce spending through a transition to non-security spending at fiscal year 2008 levels.
Pursuant to House Resolution 43, the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Rules printed in the resolution is adopted, and the resolution as amended is considered read. The gentleman from California, Mr. Dreyer, and the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern, each will control 30 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks on the resolution that is before us.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, one of the indelible and enduring images of 2010 was that of violent protesters on the streets of Athens following the proposal of the government to impose austerity measures. We all remember very vividly that scene. Having come to the brink of collapse and nearly dragging the entire Eurozone with it, the Greek government had no choice but to scale back its profligate ways. Thousands of public employees took to the streets in anger. Now, Madam Speaker, I contrast that with the image of tens of thousands of peaceful demonstrators across America coming out to express their frustration with excessive government spending. Rather than demanding more federal largesse, these taxed-enough already demonstrators actually came together to petition their government for greater restraint and discipline. This might actually, Madam Speaker, have been a first in human history. It was a powerful illustration of the unique nature of American values, but it was also a testament to just how badly fiscal discipline is needed. This issue is no longer just the purview of budget wonks and economists. The looming crisis of our national debt is a challenge that working Americans recognize very clearly. While the magnitude of a $14 trillion debt is simply too massive to truly comprehend, those with a modicum of common sense can appreciate the crushing weight that will fall on future generations. If we do not immediately change course, the damage could quickly become irreversible. Today's resolution is a clear signal that we are making that change in course. House Resolution 38 is the first step, Madam Speaker, the first step in what will be a long and admittedly very difficult process over the next 2 years as we pursue the goal of living within our means. This resolution lays down a marker to return to pre-bailout, pre-binge spending, pre-stimulus levels. This resolution provides the framework under which we will finally dispense with the fiscal year 2011 budget, which the previous Congress unfortunately failed to do. Nearly halfway through the fiscal year, we're nearly halfway through the fiscal year. Now the imperative is to responsibly finish the work that is really very, very urgent for us to approach and deal with at this moment. Once we move beyond this task, we will immediately pivot to fiscal year 2012. We will craft a budget, we will consider alternatives with a full debate, and then this House will pass a budget. We will then proceed with consideration of appropriations bills. We will return to the traditional open process that always governed our appropriations bills prior to the last couple of years. This will ensure full accountability and true collaboration and restore the deliberative traditions and customs of this body. There will be very tough choices ahead. Very tough choices need to be made. There's no doubt that we will engage in heated debate, and I suspect we will in just a few minutes right here. But we simply cannot afford to put off the hard work any longer. Madam Speaker, today we take the first step. I urge my colleagues to support this resolution. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield myself such time as that may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise in very, very strong opposition to this resolution. As I said yesterday during the debate on the rule, there are numerous serious problems with this resolution. First, it's meaningless rhetoric. My friends on the other side of the aisle like to talk a lot about cutting government spending, but the resolution before us doesn't cut a single dollar from the federal budget, not a single cent. The Republican Study Committee recently proposed $2.5 trillion in budget cuts, and their chairman, Mr. Jordan from Ohio, said the following when he introduced this plan, and I quote, $100 billion is the number the American people heard last fall. It seems to me we should be able to find $100 billion, end quote. Yet even after pledging a $100 billion cut in funding, the distinguished chairman of the Rules Committee couldn't come up with a number when we asked yesterday, and instead produced what is likely the first budget resolution in history that doesn't contain any budget numbers. That might be because the Republican majority can't seem to figure out what the numbers should be. Now, we've heard all kinds of numbers. We've heard $30 billion, $50 billion, $100 billion, and beyond. But I suspect, Madam Speaker, that's because the Republican majority is discovering that it's a lot harder to walk the walk than it is to talk the talk. It is a lot easier to say things in a campaign than it is to do things in a legislative body. They are realizing that when you start trying to make those kinds of cuts, you start seriously affecting the American economy and the American people. We are told that the Congressional Budget Office will produce some numbers tomorrow. I wonder why we couldn't wait until tomorrow to debate this resolution, but the answer is obvious. The President of the United States will be here this evening for the State of the Union address, and the Republican majority needs a new set of talking points. It's that kind of politics, where message is more important than substance, that makes the American people cynical about Washington. Second, the resolution continues the dangerous precedent of giving one individual, the chairman of the Budget Committee, rather than the full membership of this House, the ability to set spending levels for the federal government. And third, the resolution's vague and unjustified wording that only targets non-security spending, even though everyone from Secretary Gates to Speaker Boehner has recognized that waste exists in the Department of Defense and in the Department of Homeland Security and other security-related agencies. It says a great deal about the priorities of the new Republican majority that they would treat wasteful contracts and redundant weapon systems as sacred, but would put Pell Grants, medical research, food safety, FBI, ATF, and DEA agents and other vital programs on the chopping block. Now, of course, when we Democrats have the audacity to talk about the need to protect those important programs, our Republican friends grow indignant and head to the fainting couch. Oh, no, they say. We would never cut those things. But, Madam Speaker, the numbers just don't add up. When you start saying the popular program after popular program will be protected, you realize that it would take massive cuts in other parts of the budget. When we talk about exempting only security programs, it means that other programs will need to be cut by 30% below current levels. That means the Department of Justice has to cut 4,000 FBI agents, 800 ATF agents, 1,500 DEA agents, and 900 U.S. Marshals. Federal prisons have to cut 5,700 correctional officers, and the federal government will lose the capacity to detain 26,000 people because of their immigration status. Now, of course, the distinguished chairman of the Rules Committee said we're not going to cut the FBI, as we said yesterday, so I can only assume that means more ATF agents and DEA agents and U.S. Marshals will be fired by the Republicans. I can only assume that this means more than 26,000 people in this country illegally won't be in federal custody. That's the Republican agenda? Madam Speaker, I think former Secretary of State Colin Powell said it best this weekend, and I quote, "I'm very put off when people just say, let's go back and freeze to the level 2 years ago. Don't tell me you're going to freeze to a level. That usually is a very inefficient way of doing it. Tell me what you're going to cut." As I urge my colleagues to reject this misguided resolution, I ask my Republican colleagues, what's the number and what are you going to cut? I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from California.
Speaker, I yield myself 30 seconds to say to my good friend again that this is the beginning of a process. We have been saddled with a situation where for the first time since the implementation of the 1974 Budget Impoundment Act, we had no budget. And so what is it we've been left to do? Nearly halfway through the fiscal year, we're faced with this challenge. We now are in a position where we are going to begin going through regular order to ensure that we have a budget, which we didn't do last year, and have an open, free-flowing debate on the amendments through the appropriations process. And I will say to my friend that defense issues are going to be a high priority when it comes to oversight and scrutiny. And with that, Madam Speaker, I'd like to yield 3 minutes to my very good friend and colleague, the distinguished chair of the Committee on the Budget, from whom we're going to be hearing later this evening, the gentleman from Janesville, Wisconsin, Mr. Ryan.
Gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the Chairman for yielding. Madam Speaker, I'm enjoying sort of the hyperbolic rhetoric we're hearing here today about one person, one committee, one man dictating and all of these things, as if it's an unprecedented action. Well, this move is not unprecedented. The reason this is necessary is unprecedented. It is unprecedented since the 1974 Budget Act passed that Congress didn't bother to pass or even propose a budget. Madam Speaker, the reason we are here today is because the last majority last year didn't even bother trying. That means we have no budget in place. And with no budget in place, there's no Budget Act to enforce. That means government is going and spending unchecked. No limits, no policeman on the beat, nothing. Why are we giving this kind of power to the chairman of the Budget Committee to put these numbers in? Because we don't get the numbers from the Congressional Budget Office until tomorrow. And we've said all along what we aim to do. Bring discretionary levels down to pre-bailout, pre-stimulus levels. And then for all the authorizing committees, it's put the CBO baseline in place. CBO baseline doesn't exist right now. It comes tomorrow. So what we're simply trying to do, Madam Speaker, is get some sense of limits back on spending, is get some sense of a budget process back in place. We don't think we should have a system, a spending process without restraints, without limits, without any prioritization. That is exactly why we're doing this. Business as usual has to come to an end, Madam Speaker, and we've got to put limits on spending. And that is why we have a Budget Act, to police the spending process, to make sure that it conforms. But there is no Budget Act, there is no number to police because they didn't do a budget last year. That is exactly and precisely why this measure is necessary. So all the rhetoric aside, the days are over of unlimited spending, of no prioritization, and the days of getting spending under control are just beginning. This is a first step in a long process. This is a minimal, small down payment on a necessary process to go forward so that we can leave our kids with a better generation, so we can get this debt under control, so the spending spigot can close, so we can do right by our constituents and treat their dollars wisely. With that, Madam Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
I'm glad that the chairman of the Budget Committee finally joined this debate. And I would say two things. One is that last year we passed the Budget Enforcement Act with real numbers in it, and we voted on it. And it was significantly less than the numbers that the President had proposed, number one. Number two, one of the things that we proposed in the Rules Committee was an amendment to allow members of the House on both sides of the aisle to be able to vote on the number. And that was rejected on party line as somehow a radical idea. And then the chairman of the Rules Committee talks about this free-flowing debate we're having. We're having this debate today under a closed rule. And so there's no opportunity for amendment. And with that,
the gentleman yield?
I'll yield it to the gentleman.
I thank my friend for yielding, and I'd like to point to our colleagues, Madam Speaker, H-Res 38. It is literally a one-sentence measure, which says that our goal is to get to 2008 levels of spending or less.
I thank the gentleman, and I reclaim my time.
Gentleman,
I appreciate the brevity of the bill, but that doesn't mean the bill doesn't have a very negative impact. And when we tried yesterday to protect the FBI and enforcement agents from cuts, that was voted down. So we're very concerned because we don't know what the number is. And I think the people in this Congress on both sides of the aisle, the American people, ought to know what we're talking about. Is it $100 billion or is it more? Where is it? And where are those cuts going to come from when you keep on exempting programs? With that, Madam Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Van Hollen.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my colleague. Here we are a day later. Yesterday we asked our colleagues, what's the number going to be? What's going to be the spending ceiling for this Congress and for the United States government? They didn't have it yesterday, and we don't yet have it today. It's a budget resolution without a budget number. Now, we've heard a lot of talk about what happened last year. What this budget resolution relates to is 2011. In fact, this body voted last year on a Budget Enforcement Act. I have it right here in my hand, and it set budget ceilings. It had a real number. Some people voted for it. Some people voted against it. But this body did what it always does when it makes decisions of this magnitude. We took accountability for it. Now you have a resolution that violates the pledge of transparency because it doesn't have a single number on it, and it violates the pledge of accountability because you're asking every other member of this body to contract out his or her vote to one person. Now, I have great respect for the chairman of the Budget Committee, and I, too, congratulate him on being selected to give the response to the State of the Union address. This isn't about a particular individual. It's about all of us taking responsibility for a major decision. And what this resolution does is contracts out that responsibility. It doesn't have a number. We don't know if it's going to be $100 billion. We don't know if it's going to be $80 billion. We don't know if it's going to be $40 billion. We don't know if it's going to be the number that the Republican Study Conference wants, which the majority leader said good things about. We don't know. What we do know is this, that the Bipartisan Deficit and Debt Reduction Commission told us two things. Number one, we need to act now to put this country on a fiscally sustainable path, and we should do that by working together. They also said another thing, that deep, immediate cuts beyond what had been put in place and recommended by the Fiscal Commission would hurt the economy when it's in a very fragile state and risk throwing more Americans out of work. That would be a terrible mistake. And yet, our colleagues want us to make a decision to vote on this without telling us what the number is. So when we asked what the number was, they said, we're waiting for the Congressional Budget Office. When will the Congressional Budget Office have its numbers? Tomorrow, 24 hours from now. Then we can do the right thing. We can see what the cuts will be, and we can make a decision as a body taking responsibility for this decision. Why is it we're not waiting 24 hours? Well, it's pretty obvious. A little later today, the President of the United States will be here to deliver the State of the Union address, and instead of being serious about this number, they wanted to deliver a press release. I mean, that is what this is about, without a number. Otherwise, we would wait 24 hours and our friends could tell us what that number would be. You are asking this body to buy a pig in a poke, and the reason it is so serious is that, if I could just have an additional 30 seconds.
I yield to the gentleman an additional 30 seconds.
I thank my friend.
The gentleman is recognized.